All right, everybody. Today I'm here to talk about my favorite books that I read this year, 2021. I feel like maybe I should clarify that none of these are books that were written this year or new releases or anything like that. These are just books that I read this year that are my top favorites. If you guys follow my channel, you probably know I don't really keep up with a lot of new releases or newer books. I tend to enjoy discovering all of these old classic gems, and I like reading a lot of 90s books. As a child of the 90s and early 2000s, I really cling to that 90s nostalgia and YA and middle grade horror and all that sorts of stuff. So yeah, today I'm just going to be talking about my top 10 absolute favorite books of this year. And I'm going to be dividing it up into two categories. First, I'm going to talk about my 5 favorite middle grade and YA books. And then I'm going to be doing my top 5 favorite adult novels. So let's just jump into it. And of course, starting with book number 5 of my favorite middle grade and YA books, we have Florida Fog Phantoms from the American Chiller series. Now, earlier this year, I did a video talking about this book series, and I basically enjoyed these just as much as Goosebumps when I was a kid. This was kind of my introduction into horror literature, and upon rereading them as an adult, I've discovered that these books have not aged well at all. They are not nearly as good as Goosebumps are. They don't really have that timelessness to them. But this is definitely the best one of the series. This is the one that I feel like still holds up. And yeah, this one just has I have so much nostalgia for it, honestly, which is why I decided to put it on this list. And out of all of the American and Michigan Chillers books, this is the only one I feel like I still enjoy a little bit as an adult. This is, I think, Jonathan Rand at his best. He's definitely not the best author in the world. Again, these books were self-published, but this is definitely him at his best. This is the most suspenseful and fun American Chillers books. And I just remember this one just capturing my imagination and just terrifying me as an 11-year-old kid or 10 years old or however old I was when I first read this. And yeah, just so much nostalgia. I absolutely love Florida Fog Phantoms. So yeah, this is number 5 on my list of 5 favorite children's and YA books that I read this year. And one thing too I want to mention is I'm not including any Goosebumps books on this list, because if I was doing that, it would probably all be Goosebumps books. So no Goosebumps books on this list. And at number 4, we have My Teacher is an Alien by Bruce Coville. I'm not sure how his last name is pronounced. This is a really old, beat-up copy. I think I got this at a library book sale. And I've never read anything by this author before. I didn't even really know anything about this book. I just kind of purchased it on impulse. And I was surprised at how good this book actually is. There's a lot of humor in here. There's some suspenseful stuff. The writing isn't the best. Better than Jonathan Rand. Still not the greatest. But I had a really good time with this book, and there's some deeper stuff in here. I don't remember exactly what they were, but there was a couple like adult jokes in here too, like just some kind of subtle like innuendo almost, if I remember correctly. There was some stuff in here that made me chuckle, and it had a surprisingly like emotional ending to it. There's some different things going on. This was a really good book. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I didn't go into this with any sort of expectations whatsoever. That's usually the case with any children's book that I pick up. And yeah, this one just really surprised me. I really liked My Teacher is an Alien, and I may check out more Bruce Coville in the future. From what I've learned afterward is he was actually a pretty big author in the 80s and 90s, I think. Let me check. Forget what date this book was published in. Yeah, late 90s. Or late 80s, I'm sorry. 89 this book was published in. So I guess he was a pretty big children's author around that time. Even a little bit before Goosebumps. So yeah, I might have to check out more by this author, because this was a good book. I think I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. My Teacher is an Alien comes in at number 4. I should also clarify, you guys have probably already figured it out, but I just want to say too, I'm not going really in depth with these books to keep the video kind of short. I'm not doing lengthy reviews on any of these, and some of these I've already covered anyways, previous on my channel. So yeah, let's just keep going through the list, guys. At number 3, we have another book that really surprised me. Never read anything by this author before, and this is also a very popular author. Don't know how I've never read anything by him, and that is Roald Dahl. And this is The Witches. And this book, I had a blast with. This book was so much fun, very dark, surprisingly dark. There's a lot of stuff in here that, like, death and some violence and some stuff that's just very surprising to find in a kid's book. But it was also very funny, humorous. There's just a lot of funny stuff in here. I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I absolutely adored this book. Unfortunately, there's a part in the book towards the... I'll just spoil it. Spoiler warning. There's a part later in the book where our main character turns into a mouse. The witches turn him into a mouse. And then the whole second half of the book, or like third act, I guess, I don't remember how long it went on for, is basically him as a mouse. And a lot of the suspense revolves around him. Trying to stay alive as a mouse and trying to trick these witches or whatever. And I don't know. That part of the story I didn't really care for as much. I enjoyed the first like half of the book a lot more and how dark it was. And towards the end, it turned a little bit more childish. And yeah, overall though, I still had a good time with this book. I definitely want to read more Roald Dahl in the future. And yeah, this was a good book. The Witches comes in at number 3 for me. At number 2, we have the one and only R.L. Stine book on this list, and that is Beach House. This is part of the Point Horror series, and this is probably my favorite R.L. Stine book that I read this year, aside from Goosebumps. And this is probably my favorite Point Horror novel so far. Halloween Night, I think, kind of comes in at a close second place, but this book is just so much fun. Again, this one just has all the typical ingredients of an R.L. Stine book. Teen drama, lots of mystery, cheesiness galore, but it's just so much fun. This book was just an excellent read. I read this back in the summer, and R.L. Stine does a fantastic job of capturing those summer vibes, and of course adding the horror elements to this book with lots of murder. There's a fairly high body count in this book, if I remember correctly. And then there's also some supernatural implications as well. And yeah, this was just a great book. Perfect blend of the horror and humor that R.L. Stine is just really good at doing sometimes. And yeah, I love Beach House. I originally gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars, but I think I can round it up to a 4 stars. This was a really good book. I like Beach House. And my absolute favorite book, children's book that I read this year, is one that I've read before. I should preface this by saying a couple books on this list, not just this list, but the following one as well, are books that I've read before. These are rereads. And this one is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. I feel like I don't have to talk about this book too much. I don't think anything I can say will do this book justice anyway. This book entirely deserves its title as a classic in children's literature. This is a perfect 5 out of 5 star read for me. I absolutely love Charlotte's Web. This is the first time I believe I've read it as an adult. I read this book numerous times when I was a kid, and I just decided to reread it earlier this year. I think I read it back in like the spring or something, and I loved it. This book is completely flawless. It's absolutely amazing. If you've never read Charlotte's Web, you need to, because this is one of the greatest children's books of all time, in my opinion. Absolutely love Charlotte's Web. I cannot say enough about this book. Like I said, nothing I really say about it can do this book justice. So this is just one you need to read for yourself to find out what I mean. So yeah, Charlotte's Web is my favorite book of 2021, my favorite children's book of 2021. All right, on to my top 5 favorite adult novels for this year. And at number 5, I have a book that I don't have the copy of with me. I don't know what I did with it. I think I might have given it away or something. I don't know why, but I can't find it, so I must have given it away or traded it or something. But at number 5, we have The Bad Place by Dean Koontz. Now, earlier this year, I kind of went on a little Koontz phase, I guess. I was uploading some reviews of his books. I did a top 5 video. I did a few individual reviews. And I was kind of getting sick of reading his books so much and kind of discovering that he's a little bit of a hack. He tends to repeat a lot of his plots. But out of the last few Dean Koontz novels that I read this year, The Bad Place was definitely the best of them. And even though that book was very, very flawed for me, there was a lot of stuff that kind of irritated me about that book. It had a lot of potential and promise, and I absolutely loved some of the ideas behind that book. And it's definitely, I think, one of Dean Koontz's better novels out there. Maybe not quite one of his like top shelf best books, but it's one of his better ones for sure. I ended up giving that one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And yeah, The Bad Place comes in at number 5 for me. If I would probably recommend checking that one out. Again, not one of his absolute best, but it was still a really good book. I enjoyed it, even though I had some issues with it that really brought my rating down. At number 4, we have a classic, and that is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And this was a buddy read with Juan over at Plagued by Visions. And this is my second time reading a John Steinbeck book. The first one was The Pearl, which was okay. I liked it. I wasn't a huge fan of it. This one I liked a lot more. This book is very sad, emotional. This was a great book, honestly. I don't know how I've never read this or never really read much of John Steinbeck before. Obviously, he's a very well-known classic author in literature. And yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this book. This is another one I feel like no matter what I say about it, I'm not really going to be doing it justice. So yeah. And I feel like this being a classic to a lot of you probably have already heard of this or at least kind of know about it. So Of Mice and Men comes in at number 4 for me. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. This was a great book. At number 3, my third favorite book that I read this year is Misery by Stephen King. Now, I've talked about Stephen King quite a bit before on my channel. You guys probably know I'm not the biggest Stephen King fan in the world. I tend to like his short fiction more than his novels. But this might be my favorite Stephen King novel. Previous to this, Salem's Lot was my favorite. This one is kind of tied with Salem's Lot. Now, they're both 4 out of 5 star books for me. I initially gave it 3.5, but I think I can round it up to 4 stars. This book was just so good, guys. Again, it did have some issues. It wasn't perfect for me. But this is definitely the most suspenseful and intense and just, man, page-turning Stephen King book that I've read so far. This one did not feel bloated or bogged down with rambling and too much detail. This book was really good. It's really amazing suspense at some points in the book. There were some parts that did kind of linger a little bit too much with the inner monologue and just kind of confusing thoughts. And yeah, it just got it kind of a little bit confusing towards the end of the book, if I remember. But this book has some of the best suspense I've ever read in my life. It was so good, honestly. And it's a very bleak novel, too. It's kind of terrifying, honestly. Yeah, like I said, this is probably tied with Salem's Lot as my favorite Stephen King novel. 4 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved Misery. This was a great book. I did watch the movie afterwards as well. And honestly, the movie kind of sucked. I think maybe if I had seen the movie before reading the book, I might have enjoyed it a little more. But watching the movie after reading the book, it just, man, the book is just so good. Such a great exploration of psychological elements, and there's just so much going on in here. I have a full review of this up on my channel. It's like a 30-minute review or something. If you guys want to go watch that, where I talk about this book a lot more than I'm going to right now. But yeah, I love Misery. Great book. 4 out of 5 stars. And this comes in at number 3 for me. My favorite books of 2021. At number 2, my second favorite novel of the year is The Troop by Nick Cutter. Now, when I first read this, I initially gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars as well. I think that's kind of my favorite rating to give. It seems like I'm always giving 3.5 star ratings. But the more I think about it, the more I might as well just round this up to a solid 4 stars. Because this book has really stuck with me. Out of all the books that I've read this year, this one has stuck with me the most. I haven't been able to get it out of my memory. A lot of the scenes in this book were so vivid. And yeah, they've just really stayed with me. And this book I read in, I want to say like 2 days, 2.5 days maybe. I read this book very quickly. And it's not super long. I think it's about average. Yeah, about 340 pages. About average for a novel. But I read through this book very quickly. I couldn't stop. I couldn't put this book down. But at the same time, this book was horrifying. It's kind of tied with Misery, I think. Both of these books are solid 4 out of 5 stars. But I think I decided to give the slight edge to The Troop just because this one just was more horrific to me. As kind of like an germaphobe myself with a little bit of like OCD tendencies, the idea of a parasitic infection is just absolutely horrific. Honestly, this book scared the heck out of me. It just scared me in the sense of just how gross it is and graphic, and just the idea of having this creature inside of you, this parasite, and there's no way to run from it, no way to hide from it. You're just completely vulnerable to what's going on. There's really nothing you can do. There's no way to stop it. Just the thought of that is horrifying. So yeah, this book, again, it's not perfect. It does have some flaws. The writing isn't always the best. And I just had some smaller issues with the story, and there were a few like cliche moments in here. But overall, this book is probably my favorite. Scratch that. It is my favorite horror novel of the year, even though it's only a 4 out of 5 stars. And yeah, The Troop was a great book. I highly recommend reading this. The Troop by Nick Cutter comes in at number 2 for me on my favorite books of 2021. And my absolute favorite book that I read this year is a reread. Kind of like a reread was number 1 for my favorite children's book. This book is also a reread for me. And this is absolutely my favorite book that I read in all of 2021. And again, this is kind of a classic. And it is The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. And this almost isn't even a novel. This is more of like a novella-length story. I guess it's a novel, a short novel. About 200 pages. Similar to like a Fear Street book or something. And I absolutely love this book. I think I might have read this a few times now, actually. I know I read it once when I was younger, or maybe a couple times when I was younger. And I reread this book earlier this year, back in like January or February, towards the beginning of the year. And man, this book is nearly flawless. I think I have to give this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love The Invisible Man. This is a great like sci-fi, suspense, comedy with a few little like sprinkles of horror elements to it, or crime elements, I guess would be more accurate. But man, this is just a great story. Love The Invisible Man. Absolute classic book. I believe this is the only H.G. Wells book that I've read so far, but I definitely need to get to more material by him because this book is fantastic. I love The Invisible Man. All of the elements are blended so well in here. It's very suspenseful at times, also very funny. And yeah, this is just a great book, honestly. I don't know what to say about it. If you've never read The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, you need to. This is a great book. It must be a great book if I'm putting it above these other well-known classics, Misery and Of Mice and Men. I love The Invisible Man, and I can't wait to get to more by H.G. Wells. So yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. My favorite book of 2021. So guys, that is it. Those are my favorite books this year, my top 10. What is your top 10 list, or just what are a few of your favorite books that you read this year? Let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to discuss it with you guys. Unfortunately, I didn't have like an amazing reading year, I guess. I didn't have any books that really blew me away. My top 2 favorite books, The Invisible Man and Charlotte's Web, were rereads for me. But The Troop and Misery by Nick Cutter and Stephen King, respectively, came pretty close to knocking my socks off, so to say. Those were probably the 2 best novels that I read. And yeah, I still had a really good reading year. Lots of really fun books. A lot of not so good ones as well, but of course that's always the case. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have, guys. So let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on any of these books that I've talked about, and what your favorites were for this year, or least favorites. So yeah, guys, that's it. Happy New Year's, and thanks for watching.